Coming to you from the greatest city in the world, this is the #1 showbiz podcast. It's Talk for Two. Here's your host, Matt Bailey.
Hey, thank you so much, Mr. Gary. Let's start, as usual, by thanking Axtel Expressions and the Tangent Bound Network. The Tangent Bound Network, that should be the Tangent Bound family. I want to thank Mark Bogner for creating a family of podcasters. Go check it out. Well, that time of year is upon us. If you're looking for the perfect gift for the performer in your family this holiday season, or you just want to treat yourself, check out the Sit Stand. It's like a vent stand on steroids, with an adjustable ledge that acts as a footrest and a compartment for props. This accessory is a must-have for ventriloquists, magicians, and any other entertainer. I guarantee you'll find a use for it. All of these unique elements combine, and you can get creative with it. Order now at axtel.com to have in time for all the December merriment. Today, we have a true legend on our show. He is one of the classiest guys in our industry. Ventriloquist and figuremaker Jerry Layne will have you all transfixed with his stories from his life in this business. When we were recording, I know he had me I can't believe some of the stuff he was talking about. I think you can hear a couple of times I'm just going, wow. And I'm whispering into the microphone because I don't want to interrupt him. Layne has had a decades-long career performing as a full-time ventriloquist. He called Paul Winchell a friend and mentor, and he also grew close to the Wences. And for those of you wondering, yes, Jerry spends just a short time responding to a former guest, Michelle Lafong, and her tales of controversy regarding Jerry and the Wences estate. The truth is truly fascinating. But that's not what today is really about. Today is all about letting a true show business renaissance man tell his story and why it is so important never to forget the era of show business he grew up in. Here now, with how he went from a game show producer to full-time vent, our interview with Jerry Layne. Jerry Layne, welcome to Talk for Two, sir. It's been a long time coming. We should have had you on here forever ago. How are you doing, sir?
Pretty good, Matt. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for doing this. This is going to be a lot of fun.
All right, let's just go. I'm ready.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm ready too. I'm so curious. How did you get started in ventriloquism?
Well, I grew up in New York at a time when there was still a lot of variety around. Mm-hmm. And the early TV shows had ventriloquists. The Ed Sullivan Show was just about getting started. The Palace Theater still had vaudeville acts. The Roxy, Radio City Music Hall. And I started seeing ventriloquists on TV early on and just was enthralled with it. I loved watching ventriloquists. And so as I got older, I was able to travel from Brooklyn to Manhattan and go to shows and meet people in person. I met a lot of ventriloquists at the Palace Theater.
Yes.
And just got involved. And Paul Winchell was getting really big on television at that time. And my father knew his accountant and arranged for me to meet him after a show when I was 8 and a half.
Paul or the accountant? No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Paul. I don't think I ever met the accountant. Anyway, we went to the show, my father and I, and then they waited a few minutes till after the show and everybody cleared out, and they ushered us back to his dressing room. He was still in makeup. And we chatted, and he was very cordial to me. He was only around 24, 25 at that time. This was in the Bigelow show on NBC. We shared that with Dunnage, the Mentalist.
Yeah.
And we talked backstage for a while, and my father felt we should get out of there. And we said thank you and goodbye. And as we left, he said, "Hey, kid, you want to be a ventriloquist?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Okay, we'll see you here next week and every week after that."
Wow.
And that became a lifelong friendship to the day he died, and I became his protege when I was 8 and a half, 9 years old.
Winchell is your mentor. That's just so cool. Those days seem to be gone. That you could just show up and meet somebody. It's tougher now, but it's so cool that you have that access.
Well, of course, I had the in of my father's acquaintance that kind of opened the door for me to meet him.
Yeah.
Through the years, as I got older, I went to all these theaters in New York and got to meet lots of other ventriloquists just on my own. The Palace Theater, I would go there. They got to know me backstage. They thought I was part of the show. I mean, I'd go backstage almost every week. I still remember the alley off of, I think, 47th Street that you go to the stage door. And after some time, the guys I'd walk in and the stage door guys would say, "Oh, for the ventriloquist, right?"
Yeah.
Yeah, they knew me, and I got to meet a lot of people that way. Names that today don't mean anything to anyone in Vent, but they were the working acts then.
Yeah. It's just such a cool era, an era where you could walk backstage. Now that way of interacting is just gone. That's what I meant when I said that it's so tough. Yeah, you got to have an in, but the security itself and the ability to run in was just so lax, and I miss that. I wish I was in that era for that reason, to be able to have those encounters.
Yeah, well, of course, what am I trying to say? He welcomed me so nicely, Winchell, that first time. It was like we knew him. I mean, I was 8.5. He was like in his early 20s, but he was already a big star.
Yeah.
And he just welcomed me like he knew me and wanted, I don't know why, what it was that he looked at and said, "You know what, I'm going to help this kid." But he did until, like I say, the day he died.
And now you have the right to replicate those figures.
Yes, I do. In 1999, we talked about it, and he wanted to do full-size replicas, not like the Juro dolls that they used to put out. Mm-hmm. And so he said, "You know what? Let's get together and do this." And I had been making figures since I was about 12 or 13. And so he gave me the rights to Jerry and Knucklehead, and I still have it, and I still make them. Not as much as we used to because people don't remember him as much.
Well, that's a shame. We need to remember our history. And I mean, the thing I loved about Winchell, and maybe I want to talk about your career here in a second, but anybody that knew or encountered Winchell, I got to ask, what was the magic to Winchell? I mean, there's not many people who can get up there with a recorded song. I always forget the name of this song, but it's one of the most popular Vent clips on the internet. And it's him and Jerry, and they're doing the song, and you know that Jerry's voice is recorded, but he makes it look like he's doing it, and he's splitting perfectly. How was he able to do that?
About a year before he died, they had an evening with Paul Winchell and some other things going on. I remember Ricky Layne was there, Willie Tyler was there, and it was a full house. And he used one of my replica Jerry's, and he did that voice. Now, he was doing it live in front of an audience, not just on TV. Live in front of an audience with the recording, and the audience just went for it from start to finish.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And knew, the setup was, it's a recording, so what? He was a star, he was brilliant. And I was thinking about it. I mean, he's almost the only Vent I know that went beyond Vent. He sang, he danced, he did dramatic scenes, he got into medicine. I mean, the man never graduated high school. He was on the road with Major Bose when he was 14. But there was a mind and a talent there that couldn't be stopped.
It's incredible. What's the most important lesson he ever taught you?
Oh, boy. I spent so many hours with him. I think I don't know if there's a specific respect your audience, I think, and believe. I think the key to Winchell was that he believed in Jerry. He laughed at Jerry's jokes. His relationship with Jerry was different than like Bergen and Charlie. Mm-hmm. Where Bergen was always like the disciplinarian a little bit. Jerry and Paul laughed at each other. They had fun with each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that was in TV, where maybe in radio that wouldn't have worked, but in TV, that warmth between the two characters came across to the audience.
Wow, it really did, and I think it's going to stand the test of time, as is Jerry Layne. I know you will. Let's talk about you. Where did you first start to perform? And I know that you had another career, which we'll talk about in a minute, that many people don't know about. But where did you start performing Vent?
Oh, in Brooklyn. The first, I started, as I said, 8.5. My brother is a couple years younger than me, got a Vent doll with a pull string in the back, just a little cowboy doll as a birthday present, and I ripped it off. Put a pretzel box in the body and a screwdriver up the head, and I had my first figure.
Yeah.
And I started doing shows in school, in public school in Brooklyn, and then kind of moving around. I did family, like everybody else. You perform in the living room in front of your family, and they kind of say, yeah, sure, right, play with the doll. And when I got into my teens, my father was saying it's time to put the doll away and think about your future. And it took a long time for my father, who was an amateur magician and knew a lot of performers, to resolve the fact that this is what I was doing. And I think eventually he took a pride in it because I was starting to do some major shows, reviews and television, a couple of motion pictures. I think his mind changed about it, but he also said to me he knew too many performers who couldn't make a living as performers, and he was worried about that part of it more than ability or talent.
Right.
He just wanted to be able to make a buck.
Yeah, well, what's interesting to me, and we could be skipping over to 2 decades here. This is just something we were talking about last week while we were scheduling the interview here, is that you did put it away for a little bit, or it certainly wasn't your main career, because you got into the world of working behind the scenes on game shows. And if we're skipping a crucial point here, please correct me back, but that's kind of the next life highlight I see.
The thing was, as I said, my father didn't really want me to go into show business. He wanted me to go to college and have a career. I figured the next career close to performing would have been production. And there were very few colleges at that era that had what they called then communication arts. It was a combination of radio, television, and motion picture production. So I went to NYU and had a degree in communication arts. Came out of the Army a week later. My wife and I got married, and I had an interview and got a job at Goodson Taubman Productions. And I was with them for 14 years on various productions.
Oh, cool.
I started with a show called Say When. I did 5.5 years on Match Game, and did various. In fact, I just realized I worked on To Tell the Truth for 6 months before it went off the air, and I was the briefer. I taught the imposters how to be the person. And one of the ones that I had was Jimmy Nelson and his wife and two ladies.
Oh, wow.
Who were supposed to be Betty Nelson. And, of course, they gave me that spot to train because I had known Jimmy for like 20 years then.
Wow, that's incredible.
So that was kind of an exciting time of it. But then they moved Beat the Clock to Montreal. And my whole family and I moved to Montreal. And while I was doing Beat the Clock, I created a children's game show called Puppet People. And that was on the CTV network for 2 years. And then both Beat the Clock and Puppet People got canceled. And I moved back to the States, but we moved from New York. We moved back to Los Angeles. And I got a job on Name That Tune. And I did another 2 years in production where I was associate producer of shows. And then I was out of work.
Yeah, so back to Vent, right? Your wife...
And, well, the key to it was my wife, Judy, said to me after sitting around for a while hoping for a job, she said, all you ever wanted to do was perform anyway. Why don't you give yourself a year and see what happens? If you don't do it in a year, we'll figure something out. Well, within just a few months, I got a cruise, and then another cruise, and then I started working places like Knott's Berry Farm, and I ended up 2 years at my own show at Knott's Berry Farm, and started working around different places like Knott's Berry Farm and Magic Mountain, and that led to another cruise, which then led me to working at the Magic Castle in Hollywood. Someone saw me at the Magic Castle and hired me to open for Debbie Reynolds.
Oh, wow.
Someone saw me there and hired me for a show for a year in Atlantic City at Bally's. I ended up doing 2 years at Bally's and then went back for 12 years on cruise ships. And all of a sudden, production was history.
Wow. That's awesome. Now, I have two questions off of that. The first is kind of strange. Maybe you haven't thought about this. What did working in game show production, what did you carry with you from that era? What did you learn that you carried with you in performance?
Well, most of what I did in game shows was contestant coordinator. I got the contestants even as associate producer. Basically, my job was dealing with the people. Mm-hmm. And people in a room full of interviews to be on a game show isn't any different than working for an audience. Mm. You got to get them to like you and trust you and believe in what you're doing. Because even though they're, in essence, where before I was auditioning for a job, they were auditioning to be contestants. Mm-hmm. And so I could put myself in that place, how nervous those people were. And I mean, I've been doing this now for, 70 years I've been performing, Matt, and I'm still nervous for a week before every show I'm going to do.
Well, that's...
And so I think I could put myself in the place of those people and make them comfortable in a room full of strangers, all vying to be a game show contestant.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing when you work with an audience. Here's a bunch of strangers all put together, and your job is to make them respond as one.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then it went away for you. And the next question, I always ask this for people who have made the leap and had great luck with it, and I think you would have great insights here. Is that harder today to do? Do you think somebody just losing their job saying, I'm going to give it a year, is that more of an impossibility than in the era when you just said, I'm going to do it?
Well, I have show business has changed.
Yeah.
If you're talking about show business, when I was growing up, there were hundreds of little nightclubs around New York City, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Long Island. So every weekend, even when I was working in production, I'd work 5 days, Monday to Friday, on a game show. And virtually every Friday and or Saturday night, I was performing nightclubs all around the city. And most of them were run by the guys with the funny noses who say, hey, kid, what are you doing? I remember doing a show. There were two brothers who ran it, and I was supposed to MC the show, and I brought out the first act, a girl singer, and I came off stage, and this guy, this really tough man, he said, what is that, a new comedy act, no jokes?
Oh.
And I said, well, I'm a ventriloquist. And he said, what does that mean? I said, well, I save the jokes with the dummy. And he got angry, and his brother, who was a co-owner, said, let's give the kid a chance, and then we'll kill him. And so when I got up, by pure luck or whatever, it was one of those nights where I was on, and the audience bought everything. And I walked off stage, and these two guys were smiling and said, you're available next week? Oh, and so I started working all the clubs around. And that kept me busy for a long time on the weekends, as well as the game shows, I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No, it does, because I'm sitting here, and I'm being transported back to that era. And I could see the Palace Theater over here on 47th, like you said. And I could see the Ed Sullivan Theater up on 50th. And right smack in the middle, I can see Senor Wences Way. And I gotta ask.
Is that right?
Yeah, right. It's now called.
I didn't know there was one.
They now call that little plaza between 47th and 50th as you're coming into the upper, kind of the northern part of Times Square. That's Senor Wences Way.
Oh, nice. I had no idea.
When did you...
Remember, we've been out in New York now since 1970.
Yeah, I think it was in either the 80s or the 90s or even the early part of this century that they named it. But I can now understand why they did that, because talk about you and talk about Winchell and talk about Wences, performers that define that era. When did you meet Wences?
I was thinking about that. I can be specific about Winchell. I can be specific about Edgar Bergen. I know exactly when I met him. Sherry and I grew up together doing shows. Both our fathers were magicians. My best recollection, as I said, I used to go to the Ed Sullivan. It was before it was the Ed Sullivan Theater. But I went to the Ed Sullivan show a lot. And I'm pretty sure that's where I first met Wences. I went to the show, and of course these guys got to know me, and they, maybe they'd tell me to wait a few minutes, and then they would tell the performer, whoever I wanted to see, that there was someone to see him. And my recollection was backstage of the Ed Sullivan show. We're talking a long time ago. We're talking when I was in my teens, and that's 60-some years ago, But my recollection was I was ushered into a dressing room. We chatted for a few minutes. I introduced myself, and he was very warm and very gracious to me. And then over the next couple of years, he was doing theaters in the New York area. I think I remember he was on the Danny Kaye show, which was live at the Palace Theater. And I went to see Danny Kaye, and I went back to see Wences again. And I think it was at that point, he gave me his home phone number, and I gave him my address. And then after that, for years, I would get Christmas cards from Senor Wences. And postcards with a picture of him and one of the characters on it autographed to me. So that relationship began, like 60 years ago or something like that. And then whenever I saw he was in New York, that I was available, I would go to see him. The last time that I saw him perform, basically, he was at the Chateau Madrid, and I was off a cruise ship. And I saw he was there, and I went to see him backstage, and I spent the entire evening with him talking as well as we could, because there was that language barrier.
Yeah.
His wife sat there knitting like Madame Lafarge in the corner. Every once in a while, I would say something, he would answer me, and then she would say what Wences said, and then she would translate for me. And I said to him, I envy you. All you have to do is carry a box and Yanni. And he gestured to me to go with him, and he showed me a huge room, a storage room, with like 30 major travel suitcases. And he explained that once he was on the road for sometimes a year or more, and he had to bring all his costumes, all his makeup, all his preparations, extra puppets, had to travel everywhere. So he took long engagements. I think he was there for like 6 months at the Chateau Madrid.
Wow.
So that became like a home for him. Today, that's another thing that's different. Today's no home where you go in and even when I did cruise ships, I do 3-4 months at a time. Today, the guys get on a ship, they do a show, they get off, they get on another ship, they get off, they get on another show, which makes it much harder for guys who use props to go from ship to ship and place to place.
It's tough. Now, speaking of Wences, we got to do this. A few weeks ago, we had Michelle Lafong on the show, and she brought up some controversial stuff regarding you and the Wences estate, because like you're talking about, you got to know him. In the interest of fairness and truth, is there anything she said that you would like to respond to? I know there was some misinformation.
Yeah, there are. I honestly have listened to that show a couple of times, and I would like to address a few things, clear the air about them, and if you want to jump in, you got another question, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I've been doing Vent for 70 years. I have a good reputation with friends, the greats, and just working acts, and no one ever said anything about me the way she did, and there was never any reason to. So to give her the benefit of doubt, she was either misinformed or made assumptions about some things she spoke about that really don't have any basis in fact. She talked a lot about Pedro and the molding of Pedro. The truth of the matter is, our manager at that time and a puppeteer in Los Angeles made a business deal. I was never part of that. I never made or had or saw a Pedro mold. And she kept saying, well, they, and including me in something I had nothing to do with. So I want to state unequivocally, I never made a mold or had a Pedro. All right?
Yes. And you told me what the Pedro you used in your tribute at Vent Haven, which we'll talk about after this. But
yeah.
And it's really clever. What was it?
It was a Jerry Mahoney head. I have the rights to Jerry, and I put a beard on it.
I love it. Yeah, keep going.
But again, Michelle was misinformed. She wasn't there. She even said that she wasn't at the convention. She didn't see it. and yet she spoke about it on your show. Whoever reported to her, it may have looked like Pedro, or it was a head in the box with a beard.
Yeah.
You know, you can put your head in the box with a beard, you look like Pedro. It was a Jerry Mahoney head. I never had a Pedro. I never was involved with that at all. Then she said she thought there was a cease and desist order against me. That never happened. It wasn't me. I don't know anything about it. She said I asked Wences for the rights to make his puppets. Also, that never happened. All right. As I say, we knew each other for years and years, Wences and I. Michelle talked about the 100th birthday party in Los Angeles and how exciting it was. What she didn't mention was at the guest of honor table, there were 3 couples, Senor Wences and his wife, Paul Winchell and his wife, Jerry Layne and his wife. That was the guest of honor table. I was the only one who knew Winchell and Wences well enough to call Winchell and invite him to the party. And they asked me to stay with them the whole evening. Of course, they spoke Spanish all night, Paul and Wences, and I ended up chatting with the ladies the whole night. and I have to say, you know, I know how protective Mrs. Wences, Tally, was about Wences and the act. Because while we were sitting there, Ricky Layne, who again was a good friend of mine, I knew him since I was 13. Ricky Layne came over and said, could he meet Wences? He had never met him. And I said, well, you know, he's not well. Throughout the night, Mrs. Wences made sure he took his pills. I said, I'll ask Mrs. Wences if it's okay. So I went over to her and I said, this is Ricky Layne. He would like to meet Wences. And she kind of drew herself up and said, well, who is Ricky Layne? And I said, well, he's a ventriloquist who's been on the Ed Sullivan Show many times. And she kind of glared at me and said, not as many as Wences. And I said, no, I'm sure not. And she said, then it's okay.
Yes.
And then I introduced Wences. And so I'm at the table with Ricky Layne, Senor Wences, and Paul Winchell. I mean, you talk about heaven for a ventriloquist, right?
That's great.
You know,
awesome.
And they chatted for just a short while, and Ricky left, and then Winchell and Wences got back into it. All these guys, the truth of the matter is, Matt, I love ventriloquism, and I love everybody who does it. It's a special art, and I mean, I've been in it for 100 years. Well, not quite yet. Maybe if I'm lucky, like Wences, you know.
Yeah.
But I would never do anything to offend any of those people. I was so appreciative of them allowing me into their sphere.
Yes.
That I would never say or do anything that would harm them in any way.
And I know
that's the important thing. And just briefly, Michelle said something about my calling Mrs. Wences. I called just to confirm something I heard about Michelle doing the act. I never badmouthed her. I asked Mrs. Wences, she said, thanks for letting me know. And that was the end of our conversation. And to my recollection, Wences had passed away a few years before I called.
Very interesting.
So that's my best recollection of that. So you asked me something about the Pedro that I used at the convention. I just want to say one thing real quick about the convention.
Sure.
This is our lifeline. And I've been a member of the board for over 20 years, and it's important to the art of ventriloquism. I was a kid. I knew W.S. Berger and got to meet him once or twice. But the last few years, I've heard that younger ventriloquists, not just the kids, but a couple of generations, that influenced me when I was young, these guys, Winchell, Bergen, Jimmy Nelson, Wences, even Sherry, nobody remembers them. And so when I was asked to do the Saturday show, I said, I want to do a tribute to these ventriloquists whose legacy we should never forget. Because without them, most of us wouldn't be here anymore. Yes. We wouldn't be doing Vent. And I didn't do an entire act. I did a few minutes of each so that everybody would have a taste of those people.
Of course, and it was absolutely beautiful. And that was kind of my next question, which you answered, which is not many people, especially even historians really have a passion for preserving the knowledge of not only our past, but what those acts in our past did. Why is it important to you to keep those characters and those stories living and breathing?
Well, I think ventriloquism it has been such an important part of my life. As my wife, we knew each other since we were teenagers. Mm-hmm. And right now in my house, I have something like 70 or 80 Vent figures, some of which have to be restored. Yeah. And I started making figures when I was about 12. It's an art form that I've seen go through variations. When I was a kid, because of variety on television and theaters in New York, it was live. It was still live. I remember Hubert's Museum had ventriloquists. Russ Lewis worked there, mm-hmm. but it was right next to the Bearded Lady, the Fat Man, and freak shows. We were the circus sideshow. Yeah. And then Bergen moved it up a step. And I don't think I really appreciated Bergen till later on, that even Winchell said to me, the most long-lasting, best Vent characters ever were Charlie and Mortimer. And as I got to know Bergen over the years, I was working 2 years at Knott's Berry Farm in a show, my own show. And Bergen came in for a senior weekend. And he saw me in the middle of doing an interview, and he jumped up and he kind of embraced me. And I had known him since I was 16. And he said to me, he whispered in my ear, he says, for years I was Charlie, but I've been Mortimer for the last 10. and he was just such a warm, charming guy, totally unassuming about the stardom that he had and how many people he affected, including Winchell. Winchell knew him on radio like I did, but until he saw him in the movies, he didn't know who Charlie McCarthy was. Mm-hmm. So each of them have given something to the art. Bergen's characters and material, I think, was stronger and held up better. When I was putting the thing together for the convention, I wanted to do Ricky Layne because Ricky was a very good friend and probably offstage one of the funniest men I've ever known. Yeah. But when I watched videos of him, I found that the material he used on the Ed Sullivan show was for that time. Mm-hmm. And he used Sullivan as a prop with Velvel. But that material didn't hold up like Bergen's does or like Wences's does. And when I looked for things for Paul Winchell, it was all sketch stuff from his TV shows. There was almost no recorded thing of him doing a stand-up act with Jerry, which is what he did for years in vaudeville until he got on TV. Mm-hmm. So each of them have contributed a different kind of personality to their characters, a different kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Ambiance. Yes. Bergen was the disciplinarian. Paul was the friend. Wences was the brilliant variety act that could go into any show. Shari found the children's market. Every one of them was unique and different, and that's just the names that we know. Every one of them I saw was a little bit different. It wasn't just a guy with a dummy making it talk. It was an art. And I think we appreciate that art now because of Jeff Dunham and Terry Fader, and the convention especially, that the art of ventriloquism has pretty much come into its own after hundreds of years of not being respected, maybe. Mm-hmm.
And it's wonderful. It's like living in an age of a modernization of an art that has. How do I put this now? You got me thinking. You put it right. It finally has the respect, and when you have the respect, you can modernize. And Jeff is doing that, and Terry's doing that, and so many people are continuing to try to elevate it to be the best that it could be. Now, I respect that generation, and I love it, and because that's the kind of comedy I like. That's the kind of entertainment I strive for. So I want to get your opinion, see if I have this right. In my mind, Bergen was kind of the first Jeff. If Jeff is following in the tradition of anybody, is Bergen, because it's the comedy, it's the setup, it's the punchline. There you go. Paul is innovation, And I would think, just to kind of round it out with a trifecta, Wences, like you said, just that variety of not only innovation of what you can do with puppets, but what can you do with stuff that's not puppets. And it's a really interesting group of people from that era.
I agree with you. In fact, it's interesting, on Henson's first Muppet movie, he gave a credit to Edgar Bergen at the beginning of the movie, and yet he utilized more of Winchell's hand movements of puppets in the movie. But he never gave that credit to Winchell. But Winchell took TV, like he said to me once, he said, we were all so young, we didn't know anything about television, so whatever we did was okay. And they tried stuff. They did. For example, he said to me one week, he was just doing the act, with Jerry, the couple of sketches when he had his own show finally. And then the director came in and said, we've got to open this up more. Next week we're bringing someone from Hollywood, and I think it may have been Hedy Lamarr or somebody like that. And next week we're doing a dramatic scene. But here was a young kid out of Brooklyn, not educated, and all of a sudden he's going to be working with a Hollywood star. They handed him a script, and he did it.
That's incredible. He's just he told me about that instant. It's in his book where he was doing a sketch, live TV. The lights were hot, and they were doing a thing with cannibals, and he and Jerry were in a big pot. And you may have seen this because the tape of it is out. And he fainted in the pot because of the heat. And the two actors looked in and saw him out cold. So they just ad-libbed for a few minutes till he woke out of it, got up, and finished the show. Wow.
I mean, he was such an innovator. The moving hands, just so many other. That's what I said before. He sang, he danced, he acted. But whatever they threw at him, he said, "Okay, I don't know any better. I'll do it."
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to get back to you. We spent a lot of time, especially when we got into talking about the tribute at the convention, we spent a lot of time talking about what these people have contributed to ventriloquism. And I hope you never stop performing, Jerry. I really hope you don't. But I have to wonder, because you have spent so much time performing yourself and also being on this mission to get to keep that generation alive. How do you hope you're remembered when you stop performing?
Well, I've thought about this. I don't think I'm going to be remembered as a ventriloquist. I mean, I had a good career. I worked a lot of years. I'm still doing some shows on a limited basis. I'm still making figures on a limited. But I'm going to be 78 in a couple of months. As I said, traveling is less comfortable, not because of my age, but because they've made it less comfortable to get on an airline or a ship or travel to places. And so I don't do as much of that. So I'd like to be remembered as a performer. That's what I wanted. But the truth of the matter is, I have a feeling at some point I'll be more remembered as a figure maker, because I've made hundreds of them. Mm-hmm. For 35 years, I was the leading supplier of ventriloquist dummies, all made by hand, to magic shops all over the world. Mm-hmm. And so there are hundreds of ventriloquists. It's like my kids. They don't call, they don't write. My figures are out there all over, and my name is on them. Yeah. And so though I'd like my legacy to be remembered as a good performer and a creative act, but deep down I have a feeling the dummies will last longer than my memory as a performer. But as long as I can keep, lifting the suitcase into the back of the car and make it to a club date, I still do some. And then I cared about the art, I think. To me, it was one of the great moments of pride when they asked me on the board on the Van Haven convention. I knew W.S. Berger. I met him, started corresponding with him when I was 12. And he always took an interest in my career. When I started doing TV, he'd always write me a note telling me he watched the show and stuff like that. So the support that I got from many performers, including Bergen, and we don't have time to get into when I first met him, but he knew who I was. I mean, I'm 16 years old. I handed my business card.
How did that feel? I got to interrupt. How did that feel?
Well, he was working. He didn't work in New York often, but he was working at the Waldorf Astoria in a small lounge, and I went to see him, and I handed him. He was very impressive, top hat, tails, a cape. Somebody else, an assistant, brought the puppets and set them up. And I handed him my business card, and he looked and he said, "Oh, Jerry Layne, I know you." And I said, "You do?" And he said, "Yeah, you write the teenage column in the Oracle." And he would read the Oracle that W.S. Berger put out and knew me.
Wow.
And I spent the evening with him. Between his sets, he had a girl singer, and he handed me, this was an amazing, scary thing, Matt. He handed me Charlie. He said, "Let's see you do something." Oh, I said, "I didn't bring anything." He turned around and handed me Charlie McCarthy.
Oh.
Now, I'm 16 years old, scared to death of meeting this giant, and he handed me Charlie. So I did something, who knows what. I did something with Charlie, and he took him back, and he turned to me, and he said, "Well, that's very good. Where did you learn?" And I said, Paul Winchell taught me. And there was a long pause, and he said, Winchell, I know the name. What does he do?"
Oh, wow.
And I think he was kidding, partially.
Yeah.
And after he passed away, I told Winchell. I never told that to Winchell until after Bergen died. And Winchell just roared. He said, "I love that story." So, and then after that, I was able to keep in touch with Bergen, and whenever he was in New York, I worked at NBC on Match Game for 5.5 years, and he was doing a radio show, Chasing Sanborn Memories or something, all the radio shows. And he wouldn't do the show without Charlie. He wouldn't just do the voice.
Yeah.
He had to have the puppet with him, and I sat with him, and I have an audio recording somewhere, Matt, that I got to have made a copy of. He sat with Charlie, and he got into the voice over a 15-minute period. And he said, "That was my secret in radio. I made my voice deeper, and I put Charlie way up here." Oh. And then there was a differential. Unbeknownst to both of us, the engineer taped that.
Oh.
And I have a copy of it somewhere. Because we've moved a lot, So, I mean, these guys, you asked me before, every one of them has influenced me in a different way. And it's good to see the art being respected and enjoyed by so many millions more people than just the sideshow guy with the puppet.
It really is, and I gotta end here. But let me tell you, I want to correct something a little bit. You say you're going to be known for your figure making, and I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about that too much. But I think it's going to be everything. I think you will be remembered as one of the true Renaissance men of this art. And Jerry Layne, it was an honor and a pleasure and a privilege to have you on here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jerry. You are welcome back anytime. Something tells me you have enough stories for 50 more conversations. That's it for us this week. Next week will be really, really special. We will be taking a look back at some of the coolest moments in Talk for Two history with our buddy Chris Ortiz. We've been planning this for a while, and I'm really excited to finally have it produced. I can't wait for you to hear it. In the meantime, head over to talk4 spellout2.com for even more Talk for Two. Check out some of the awesome stuff we have for you in the Talk Shop. We are now shipping our new DVD, Ventriloquism for Comedy Clubs. That's another thing that if you want to get something for the event in your family for Christmas, check it out. If you want to work comedy clubs as event or, again, for Christmas, if you know somebody that does, get this. Plus, we are taking orders for our very first official podcast t-shirt. Get those holiday orders in, please. A thank you to our season sponsors, the Tangent Bound Network. They are our servers. And to our season entertainment sponsors, Axtel Expressions. We talked about them at the top of the show, and I hope you'll go check out their websites. You can find all you need to know about Talk for Two by going to our website, talk4 spellout2.com. Reach out by emailing talkfortwocast @gmail.com. Find our group or like us on Facebook by searching for Talk for Two. Tweet us and about us using @ and hashtag Talk for Two. The website's the only one with the numeral. Signing off for Talk for Two, I'm Matt Bailey, reminding all you vents out there to keep talking for two.
You can hear more show business interviews with the stars at talkfor2.com, where you'll also find one-of-a-kind products to improve your own show. That's talk, the number 4, TWO.com.